On June 28, 1919, 5 years to the day after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand helped ignite the First World War, representatives gathered in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles. The setting was deliberately symbolic. Versailles was the grand stage of French power, and it was also where the German Empire had been proclaimed in 1871 after France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. Now the roles were reversed. Germany arrived not as a victorious empire, but as a defeated power being handed the terms of peace. The Treaty of Versailles was meant to close the most destructive war Europe had ever seen. Instead, it became one of the most debated documents in modern history. It ended the legal state of war between Germany and most Allied powers, but it did not create a stable peace. It tried to punish, restrain, compensate, and reorganize Europe all at once, and those goals often pulled in different directions. The fighting had already stopped months earlier. On November 11, 1918, Germany signed an armistice that ended active combat on the Western Front. But an armistice is not the same as a peace treaty. It is a pause in fighting, usually with conditions, while the final political settlement is negotiated. Those negotiations took place mainly in Paris during the Paris Peace Conference, not at Versailles itself. The most powerful voices came from the so-called Big Four: Woodrow Wilson of the United States, David Lloyd George of Britain, Georges Clemenceau of France, and Vittorio Orlando of Italy. Each leader arrived with different pressures. France wanted security against another German invasion. Britain wanted balance and compensation, but not a totally destroyed Germany. Wilson promoted self-determination and a new international order. The result was never going to be simple, because the victors did not agree on what victory should mean. One of the most important facts about the treaty is that Germany was not allowed to participate in the negotiations before receiving the terms. German representatives were summoned only near the end, when the main decisions had already been made. From the Allied point of view, Germany had lost the war and therefore had to accept the consequences. From the German point of view, this felt less like negotiation and more like an imposed settlement. That perception mattered enormously. The German public had been exhausted by war, blockade, political collapse, and revolution. Many Germans expected harsh terms, but the scale and tone of the treaty still came as a shock. The new democratic government in Weimar was forced to sign it, which immediately damaged its legitimacy. Opponents could claim that the Republic had accepted humiliation, even though refusing would likely have brought renewed Allied pressure or military action. The treaty's territorial clauses changed the map of Europe. Germany lost territory in the west, east, and north. Alsace-Lorraine returned to France. Eupen-Malmedy went to Belgium. Northern Schleswig was transferred to Denmark after a plebiscite. In the east, new borders were drawn to help recreate Poland as an independent state, giving Poland access to the sea through what became known as the Polish Corridor. The city of Danzig was separated from Germany and placed under international supervision as a free city. Germany also lost its overseas colonies, which were transferred to Allied control under mandate systems. These changes were not merely symbolic. They affected industries, transport routes, national identity, and millions of people who suddenly found themselves living under new political arrangements. The treaty was therefore not just a punishment, it was part of a wider attempt to rebuild Europe after the collapse of empires. Germany was also required to disarm. Its army was limited to 100,000 men, conscription was abolished, and it was forbidden from possessing major offensive weapons such as tanks, military aircraft, and submarines. The Rhineland, a strategically vital region near France, was demilitarized. For France, these limits were essential. France had suffered invasion in 1870 and again in 1914, and much of the Western Front's devastation lay on French soil. French leaders wanted guarantees that Germany could not quickly rebuild and attack again. But from Germany's perspective, disarmament created vulnerability and humiliation. The army had been central to Imperial Germany's identity, and the restrictions made the country feel exposed. The treaty therefore tried to solve one country's security problem by creating another country's grievance, a pattern that repeated throughout the settlement. The most controversial part of the treaty became Article 231, later known as the War Guilt Clause. The article stated that Germany and its allies accepted responsibility for causing the loss and damage suffered by the Allied powers as a consequence of the war imposed by their aggression. Legally, this clause helped justify reparations. If Germany was responsible for the damage, then Germany could be required to pay compensation. But politically and emotionally, the wording was explosive. Many Germans read it as a forced confession of sole moral guilt for the entire war. The reality of World War I's origins was complex, involving alliance systems, imperial rivalries, military planning, nationalism, and crisis escalation across several powers. But Article 231 became a focal point for anger because it condensed defeat, blame, and financial obligation into one sentence. It gave critics a powerful symbol around which resentment could gather. Reparations were another major source of conflict. The treaty required Germany to compensate the Allies, especially for civilian damage caused by the war. The final amount was not fully fixed in the original treaty text, but the obligation itself was clear. Supporters argued that devastated regions needed rebuilding and that Germany had imposed massive costs on others. Critics argued that the burden would damage Europe's economic recovery and destabilize Germany's fragile new democracy. The economist John Maynard Keynes, who had participated in the peace process before resigning, famously attacked the settlement as dangerously harsh and economically short-sighted. He believed reparations would create bitterness and undermine prosperity. Later debates have complicated that picture. Some historians argue Germany's actual payments were more manageable than propaganda suggested. But politically, the reparations issue became a constant reminder of defeat and foreign pressure. Inside Germany, the treaty became known by many as a dictated peace, or Diktat. This was not just a slogan, it shaped the politics of the Weimar Republic from the beginning. The new government had not started the war, but it inherited the defeat and had to sign the treaty. Nationalists, conservatives, and later extremists used this to attack democratic leaders as traitors. A related myth, the stab-in-the-back legend, claimed that the German army had not truly been defeated in the field but had been betrayed by civilians, socialists, Republicans, or Jews at home. This claim was false, but it was politically useful. Versailles gave such myths emotional force. Every territorial loss, payment demand, and military restriction could be presented as evidence that Germany had been humiliated by enemies abroad and betrayed by leaders within. Yet the treaty was also criticized from the opposite direction. Some Allied leaders believed it was not harsh enough. French Marshal Ferdinand Foch famously warned that the settlement was not a peace, but only an armistice for 20 years. His concern was strategic. Germany remained large, industrial, and centrally located in Europe. France had won the war, but it still feared a future Germany with greater population and economic potential. The treaty weakened Germany, but it did not permanently break German power. This is the paradox at the heart of Versailles. To many Germans, it felt unbearably punitive. To some French strategists, it felt insufficiently protective. The settlement landed in a dangerous middle ground, severe enough to provoke resentment, but not strong enough to make German revision impossible. That compromise left nearly every side dissatisfied. The United States added another complication. President Wilson had championed a new world order based on principles such as open diplomacy, national self-determination, and collective security through the League of Nations. The League was included in the peace settlement as a mechanism to prevent future wars. But the United States Senate refused to ratify the Treaty of Versailles. America never joined the League of Nations, despite Wilson's central role in creating it, and instead made a separate peace with Germany. This weakened the post-war system from the start. Europe's security arrangement depended partly on American involvement, but American politics turned inward. Without the full participation of the United States, the League lacked one of the world's strongest powers. The treaty therefore created institutions meant to manage peace, while failing to secure the political commitment needed to make them fully effective. During the 1920s, diplomats tried to repair the system Versailles had created. The Dawes Plan reorganized German reparations payments and brought in American loans to stabilize the German economy. The Young Plan later reduced and restructured the payments further. The Locarno treaties improved relations between Germany and several European powers, especially by recognizing Germany's western borders and encouraging Germany's reintegration into diplomacy. For a few years, it seemed possible that the harshest edges of Versailles might be softened through negotiation. But this stability depended on fragile conditions, international lending, political moderation, and economic recovery. When the Great Depression struck after 1929, those supports collapsed. Unemployment, fear, and anger surged. In that environment, attacks on Versailles became even more potent. The treaty did not single-handedly cause extremism, but it supplied extremists with a language of grievance. The Treaty of Versailles matters because it shows how difficult it is to end a catastrophic war. The victors had real losses, real security fears, and real demands for compensation. Germany had real grievances about exclusion, humiliation, and unequal treatment. The treaty tried to punish aggression, rebuild borders, compensate victims, prevent future war, and create a new international order. But those goals did not fit neatly together. If Germany was treated too gently, France might remain unsafe. If Germany was treated too harshly, Europe might inherit permanent resentment. In the end, Versailles became less a clean conclusion than an unstable bridge between two wars. Its legacy is not simply that harsh peace causes future conflict. The deeper lesson is that peace settlements must balance justice, security, legitimacy, and economic reality. When that balance fails, the end of one war can become the opening chapter of another. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.